Hello, everyone, and welcome to our February media briefing at the Port of Los Angeles. I'm Chelsea Boyd from the Port's communications team. As we kick off our 6th year of monthly media briefings, I'm pleased, as always, to be joined by our Executive Director, Gene Seroka. Great to be here with you today, Gene.
Nice to have you back, Chelsea, and welcome, everyone. All of us at the Port, along with our supply chain partners, truly appreciate the media's ongoing interest in our operations. Today, we'll provide an update on our latest cargo numbers and discuss the factors driving our growth. Following that, we'll be joined in studio by President and CEO of the California Retailers Association, Rachel Michelin. Representing the largest retail market in the country, Rachel will share her insights on the latest developments regarding tariffs, the economy, and other public policy issues affecting consumers and retailers. Then, of course, we'll open the floor to your questions. Before we begin, though, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge the devastating fires that swept through Los Angeles County last month. While the port itself was not directly impacted, the fires are a region-wide tragedy that remains heavy in our hearts. Many of our family, friends, and partners have been profoundly affected. Together, we mourn the loss of the 29 known victims and extend our gratitude to the first responders who saved so many others. We stand in solidarity with all those who now face the daunting task of rebuilding their lives. The resilience of the people of Los Angeles is truly remarkable, and we're committed to assisting in any way we can. I'll share more about our efforts at the end of today's briefing, but for now, let me stress that we stand united as a community, and I'm confident we'll emerge even stronger.
Thank you so much, Gene, for those heartfelt remarks. As we continue to reflect on these events, it's important to also recognize the progress that we've made in our operations. So with that in mind, at last month's State of the Port, you shared the Port's strong finish to 2024. Would you elaborate on that as well as share new data on January?
My pleasure, Chelsea. The Port of Los Angeles closed 2024 on a high note, achieving our best ever December with nearly 922,000 container units handled. That brought our year-end tally to 10.3 million TEUs, a nearly 20% increase over 2023, and the second best year in our history. And most impressive to me, 2024 marked the largest year-on-year container increase that we've ever seen. On top of all that, we're excited to share a remarkable milestone. For 25 consecutive years, the Port of Los Angeles has been the busiest container port in the Western Hemisphere. As I told the 640 guests at the State of the Port, this achievement is a testament to our collective dedication and hard work. And I'm pleased to report that 2025 is starting off at the same fast pace. In January, we handled 924,000 container units, marking a new milestone as our busiest start ever. It was 8% higher than last year and 13% above the 5-year average for the month. Looking back over the past 7 months, the Port of Los Angeles has averaged more than 927,000 TEUs without a single ship backed up. Our performance has been sustained by 3 key factors. First, strong consumer spending and a resilient U.S. economy. Second, importers front-loading due to tariff concerns. That's still happening, and we'll talk more about this with Rachel in a moment. And third, we've seen incremental gains related to the Panama Canal and Red Sea diversions, as well as labor negotiations back east. Regarding East Coast labor, next week, the International Longshoremen's Association full membership will vote on a new 6-year agreement with the United States Maritime Alliance. All of us in the industry are hopeful that this will resolve the issue because it's critical to the U.S. economy for every American port to be operating at top speed with dock workers who are compensated fairly. So let's break down our record January. Imports landed at a robust 484,000 TEUs. That's a 10% increase over last year. In addition to the factors previously mentioned, many imports arrived early to avoid scheduled production slowdowns due to the Lunar New Year holiday. On the export side, we shipped out 113,000 TEUs, which is a 10% decrease compared to last year. We'll be closely monitoring these numbers, especially in light of ongoing discussions regarding tariffs. It's crucial to American manufacturers and our agriculture communities that we take every possible measure to boost U.S. exports. Finally, 327,000 empty containers were sent back to Asia in January, 14% more than last year. Normally, this indicates more cargo coming in the weeks and months ahead here to LA. The bottom line, we're off to a great start, just like last year. These record-breaking volumes are moving quickly and efficiently across our docks. Congratulations to the women and men of the ILWU, truckers, terminal operators, and all of our stakeholders on their dedication to reaching new heights.
Thanks so much, Gene, for that great overview. Let's talk about how February is shaping up and what the expectations are for the first half of the year.
Chelsea, February will likely see a dip in cargo compared to the last few months, as is often the case following Lunar New Year. This decrease typically occurs as factories in Asia ramp back up after their break. Our data indicates that volume will land in the 700,000 TEU range, a bit lower compared to last February when Lunar New Year fell a few weeks later. Looking ahead, there's a case to be made for continued healthy volume. First, the National Retail Federation expects positive retail growth in the first half of 2025. And secondly, we're not seeing many canceled sailings to LA, which is a reliable early market indicator for the coming months. That said, new economic data has raised some concerns that will be closely monitored as we move forward. January retail sales nationwide dropped by 0.9%, marking the biggest decline in nearly 2 years. And while winter storms across much of the country and the fires here in LA contributed to this decline, it could also indicate the start of consumer pullback. Additionally, the Consumer Price Index spiked by 0.5% last month, higher than most expected, while the Federal Reserve opted against reducing rates at its January meeting. The decision aligns with market speculation that the current holding pattern will continue, at least through the Fed's next meeting in mid-March. And of course, tariff concerns remain a significant issue on the global stage. In the short term, I'm hearing that front-loading strategies will continue for some importers. However, trade may ease in the second half of the year, just given the volume of cargo that has already been shipped. Tariffs will undoubtedly be a hot topic as many of us in our industry gather for the Trans-Pacific Maritime Conference in Long Beach, starting the first week of March. I plan to share that our approach at the Port of Los Angeles is to stay informed, engaged, and adaptable to however these new policies unfold.
Thanks so much, Gene. You raised some great points there, and today's guest is the perfect person to provide further insight on some of those topics. Would you please do the honors and introduce her?
Yes, certainly, Chelsea. Before becoming president and CEO of the California Retailers Association, Rachel Michelin served as CEO and executive director of California Women Lead, a nonpartisan organization supporting women's leadership in public and private sector work. Now, as the leader of the CRA, Rachel represents members who account for a quarter of the state's employment and contribute approximately $330 billion worth of GDP each year. It's also worth noting that California is the fifth largest economy in the world. Throughout the year, I often see Rachel at events, whether it's in Sacramento, at city halls, or regulatory bodies across the state. She's a tireless advocate for her membership in the public policy arena. Rachel, great to see you again. Thanks so much for flying down from Sacramento and being with us in Studio 522.
Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
And I think it's especially important that you're here on California Ports Day.
Absolutely. Glad to be here. This is an important issue. It's very important for our members. We are consumer advocates, and our job is to get those products from the ports to the consumers, both on the store shelves or at their doorstep.
Let's start off with just a couple of questions from my side. Talk about your membership and how the Retailer Association impacts the business climate here in California.
So a lot of our members are a lot of the national brands, but we also represent small retailers up and down the state of California. California is a very regulated state. Retail is becoming a very regulated industry. So it's a privilege to represent them both in Sacramento, before the legislature, the governor's office, over 25 different regulatory boards, but also city halls up and down California. And we really work hard to make sure that we not only put forward what's important for retailers, but really consumers. Because we really are, I feel, more and more those consumer advocates, because consumers are our bread and butter. And retail is very competitive. A lot of my members are competitors. And so we want to make sure that consumers are put first and foremost, because particularly right now, they're facing a lot of challenges. We're seeing prices increase on goods and services. We're seeing things coming down the pipeline from regulatory bodies and the legislature, and we really want to make sure that that consumer voice is being heard, both in the regulatory side and in the legislature.
Following the devastating wildfires here in Southern California, Rachel, so many of us were captivated by the outpouring of support and response for those who were victimized by that devastation. And I know your membership in particular, behind the scenes and out front both, have stepped out and stepped up to help. Can you talk a little bit about some of the examples that those great companies are doing right now?
Yeah, it was, unfortunately, a lot of my members have been in this situation before, where in other states they really step up when there have been national disasters. So when we were first in the throes of what was happening, a lot of my members stepped up with N95 masks. We were getting air purifiers, pillows, blankets for evacuation centers. We were getting calls from the governor's office and legislators. A lot of my members donating gift cards for different needs, grocery stores donating monetary contributions. And now we're looking at legislation on how we can be part of the rebuilding. Training folks that have been displaced with their jobs to provide other opportunities to earn a living. How can we be part of the solution? I think that's really important. I'm really proud this weekend we have small retailers stepping up, that they are donating. I'm really impressed. A lot of attention sometimes goes to some of the national brands. You might see what they do, and they have the ability to put that out there in the news and commercials. It's these small retailers who really step up. And this weekend, a number of small retailers have come together to do a pop-up shop, because they want to give joy back to folks, so they can go and pick out items of clothing or materials that make them happy, because that joy is taken away when you've lost everything. And so we're partnering with those folks to make that happen down in Los Angeles. And so it's been very heartwarming to see, as you mentioned, Los Angeles come together, but not just Los Angeles. This weekend, retailers from across the world have donated: Australia, Miami, New York. And so really the retail community really comes together, and they really want to support folks. We had employees who lost their homes. We're taking care of those folks. So, and we're going to be in it for the long haul. We're not giving up. We're going to make sure Los Angeles comes back better than it was before.
And by my witness, your organization really does step up each time. Thank you. Shifting over to federal policy for a moment, everybody in our industry is talking about tariffs, right? Whether it's the people that ship the goods, transport them, or ports like ours. What are you seeing right now? And equally as important, what are you hearing from your members about the layout that we know and that which is unknown?
On one hand, I think we understand. We want to be competitive. I think that's absolutely important. And I think, obviously we want to make sure that the United States is competitive, and that we support what we see the administration at the national level trying to do. But, blanket tariffs are going to have an impact on consumers. And it goes back to really that impact on consumers in their pocketbook. And I think that, again, a lot of my larger members, the national brands, they're able to pivot. They're able to bring things in earlier. They're able to absorb some of those costs for maybe a longer period of time. I worry about my smaller members, my smaller retailers. I know we all want to put COVID in the rear view mirror, but some of those smaller retailers are still catching up from COVID. And so they're finally getting ahead and finally, getting back to normal. And now we're kind of hit with this. They don't have that luxury to absorb all of those costs that might be happening. And it's the uncertainty. It's the stress. And I think, again, it's your store, it's your livelihood, that stress has an impact too, when that's how you take care of your family. And so I think that, it's all kind of wait and see. Let's see what happens. But I think we're going to have to, see how this plays out. I think it is going to have an impact. And again, I go back to just California. I focus a lot on California, and we follow a lot of what's going on in the legislature and then on the regulatory side. And what we are trying to do, particularly with the legislature, the governor's office, is really have them take a pause. Let's pause some of the regulatory actions in Sacramento. Let's pause some of the legislative actions that they're doing in Sacramento. Let's see what's going to happen at the federal level. Let's take some of this pressure off consumers and small businesses in particular, and let's see how this plays out so that consumers aren't burdened with extra costs. Every time regulations come through in California or these bills come through in Sacramento, there's a cost. And those costs do trickle down onto consumers. And I think we're going to face an insurance crisis. I think we all know that. We really need to start thinking about it because I do think we're starting to face a breaking point for consumers in our state.
I agree with you. And gas prices here in the state
forgot about that.
have gone up, I think, according to news reports, about 34 cents on average over the past week to 10 days.
You're right.
A refinery in Martinez having problems to go offline, some of the work here in Southern California. So if you take all this into account, I know it's a big question, but what does this bode for our economy here in California and the U.S. and this retail community that's so vitally important to it?
I think that we sometimes fall into this perception we're the fifth largest economy in the world. We're a big state. There's a lot about California that I love. It's a great state. I love California, right? I grew up here. I grew up in Orange County. My parents live here. I love it. But you wonder how much can we take? And I really think as I look at what's going on, we were talking earlier about a regulatory package right now on plastic reduction that we all agree with. We want to see a reduction in plastics in California, but right now it's a 222-page regulatory package, 222 pages of regulation. I mean, that if you don't think that's not going to increase costs on consumers, I don't know what to tell you. And sometimes I wonder what is going through the minds of our elected officials in Sacramento, because that is going to have an impact. And I think you and I have had this conversation many a time, is that there are a lot of us in the business community that we share the same goals, but talk to us and engage us, because I think we can help make it be done, these goals be accomplished in a much more efficient and cost-effective manner. And I think that's what the point that we're at now. I think you're seeing it here in Los Angeles. The governor, it's executive order after executive order of waiving regulation, which tells you that we can work on getting rid of some regulation in California. And I think it's time for us to look at how can we run more efficiently in our state. Because I think consumers are really going to get sticker shock in the next few months. If these tariffs really become a reality, coupled with the insurance crisis in California, coupled with the gas prices, eggs are still, $12 a dozen some places if you can find them, coupled with, some of the rising costs on the consumer index, as you mentioned, we're hitting a tipping point. And I think that consumers can only take so much. And I think that we're going to see what happens in the next, as we go forward, between the latter part of this year.
Very well put. And we all have to do our part, from the advocacy work to share our knowledge from the business sector, as well as those efficiencies. And we saw firsthand down here at the ports back during COVID when we had 109 ships backed up. There was no doubt in my mind that added time and complexity, added cost to the American consumer and those right here at home in California.
Yeah, and we worked together on that.
That's right.
And that was an example of the business community came together under your leadership. We were on how many calls? And we pulled everyone together. We pulled subject matter experts together, and we helped advocate to the state on how we can work collaboratively to solve the problem, and we did. And I think that's what needs to happen right now, particularly in a state like California. We want to maintain and grow as the powerhouse that we are, not just in the United States, but globally. But we're at a tipping point right now. And I really think that, I hope that the administration and the legislature works with us again like they did before, because there's a lot of problems that we can solve collaboratively.
I agree with you. And just as an anecdote to that, with all the congestion we saw at ports back during 21 and 22, how much we all worked together and with policymakers. We moved more cargo this past summer than even those highest years of volume, and not one ship was backed up. And that was because we got a lot smarter together.
Correct. Absolutely. I mean, I remember those ideas that came out of that, right? And we pushed for it. We worked together. We said, what's going to solve this problem? We brought those ideas forward. The administration worked with us. The legislature worked with us. We educated folks on that. It worked. And now we avoided, a lot more crisis in the future. And that's really what needs to start happening on a lot of these other issues, where I think we can bring that expertise from the business community. And I think that's what needs to, especially with so many new members of the legislature right now. And so I'm hopeful that we'll see that happening. I hope we don't have to get to another crisis, though, for that for them to pay attention.
Policy, efficiency, and collaboration, hallmarks of what we've been doing since we've all come to work together.
Absolutely.
Another area that you've been really focused on is organized retail crime. And at sometimes even I feel like this is out of control, and how can we regain confidence in importers, exporters, consumers alike, as well as our railroads and other service providers. Tell us a little bit about what you're doing in this area and how we can all try to make a difference.
Sure. That's another example that unfortunately had to come to a crisis before I think people paid attention in Sacramento. But they did. And I think last year we were able to get 11 bills through the legislature that really addressed this issue. But it took 4 years to get there. But I will say that, California, we really do. 2018, though, there was a bill passed to develop the organized retail crime statute. We work with the California Highway Patrol, with the organized retail crime task forces, and Governor Newsom has invested heavily in that. And this last year, we were able to get permanent funding. We expanded that from 3 to 5 task forces. We were able to get cargo theft added, including rail, into that. We really were able to add enhancements for smash and grabs. We were able to add new felonies. We were able to do a lot in this package, really because, number one, I went forward with a plan and said, here's what needs to happen. Here's how we can solve the problem. And I worked collaboratively across the aisle with Republicans and Democrats with a strategy saying, here's how we can solve the problem. And really it shows how when you come with a plan and you work together, you can have success. But it really is something I think in the next few years you're going to see some changes. I think what the work that the CHP does in collaboration with retailers and local law enforcement is phenomenal. A lot of things you don't see because they work quietly and they do things, but I think we're going to start seeing a lot of things happening. The permanent funding now is key because the CHP can really invest and hire these cases. A lot of these cases, though, especially when you're dealing with the ports, it's Homeland Security, it's FBI, they're international cases, they're across the U.S. They're mind-boggling when you see them. And we're actually working on a bill this year to deal with gift cards because the crime rings will drain gift cards. It's another big problem that we're hoping to solve that problem as well. Add that to the organized crime, groupings that law enforcement will be able to use to also protect our consumers, protect our retailers, and hopefully deter some crime, because we know that's a big issue at the ports as well.
And I know all of this work is a combination of so many people, as you rightly mentioned. Here at the port, Head of Public Safety and Port Police Chief Tom Gazy has been working with federal, state,
Absolutely.
county, and local officials, along with business interests, your representation, day and night. We've got over 1,000 cameras now at the Port of Los Angeles alone that are helping, along with these other allied agencies, really have a fix on exactly what's happening and how we can deter that crime. So from top to bottom, Rachel, there's a lot of effort happening here, and thanks to your leadership.
Well, and it's an example of, I always go and ask the experts, what do you need? What's going to solve the problem? What's going to help you? And that's what I take to the policymakers. I'm not the expert, they are. And I think that's where we can really get some of these reforms. That's my job. And that's where I think that collaboration works. And that's why we were able to be successful with those issues we had with the ports a few years ago, is because we talked to the experts and we took that back to the policymakers. So I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah, it's noticed.
Yeah.
Thank you. And it's so timely that you're here today, as we mentioned, and talking about all these insights. Really, really great for our viewership to have. Chelsea, back over to you. I think we have some questions from the media.
Thanks, Jean. We do. As usual, a few questions have come in advance. But of course, if you're joining us via Zoom, please feel free to type questions into the chat box, but please include your name and affiliation. We'll start with our first question here. This one is for you, Rachel. This comes from Lisa Bartline of Reuters. Lisa asks, has the U.S. Department of Commerce given retailers guidance on how long it will take to have systems in place to collect duties on small packages that used to enter the U.S. under de minimis? If so, what is that timeline looking like?
Quick answer, no. We have not received any guidance. That's it.
Great. We'll take a quick answer. Thanks, Rachel. Our next question is for you, Jean. This comes from Vanessa Yurkovich of CNN. Vanessa asks, what have the tariff impacts been so far on the Port of Los Angeles? Any shifts in trade or volume?
Thanks for joining again this month, Vanessa. As you know, we've got some experience in this area, beginning with the tariffs that were implemented back in the spring of 2018. We saw a lot of run-up in cargo before milestone implementation dates, and then pretty big drop-offs thereafter, and it's no different now. We've had 7 consecutive peak season type months, all in preparation for possible tariffs that were talked about on the campaign trail last summer. And as we've mentioned a couple of times, we've been able to handle that cargo quite well. From data technology that allows us to see the goods coming in 40 days before they arrive Los Angeles, to the work that we do with the membership of the CRA, making sure that we've got our skilled labor, land, and machinery ready to handle that volume. So one, more cargo comes in to leverage down that price if and when tariffs go in place, and so far they have. 10% tariffs on all goods from China, 25% on Canada and Mexico that were paused for 30 days based on ongoing discussions around border security and illegal drugs. Please remember that China was once 57% of our business portfolio here in Los Angeles. It's now about 45% and likely will continue to shift downward. Yet, we've still been able to grow since back in 2018. We've been chasing the cargo. Partners on the shipping side have put in nonstop services because that speed component was always our value proposition to market. And being close to North Asia, that was relatively straightforward. Now, as we see sourcing migrate to Southeast and South Asia, it's a little different calculus, but I'm very pleased by everybody rallying together, and the performance on the ground by our longshore members and terminal operators continues to prove that we're a strong gateway to bring in all this cargo. Now, as we look forward, what about reciprocal tariffs that have been coined in Washington? The possibility of retaliatory tariffs beyond what we've seen as well, all lead to higher costs and more uncertainty. So we'll see what the weeks and months ahead bring. Hopefully, some of these negotiations can bring the temperature down a bit. But all in all, this is a repeat of what we saw in 18, but at a much more higher level with more complexity. Thank you, Vanessa.
Thanks, Jean. Vanessa has a follow-up question. This one's for Rachel. Vanessa asks, are you seeing retailers shift production out of China more and more?
Actually, Vanessa, we are. They are looking at other markets. They're looking, again, to get their goods in from different areas. So we're absolutely seeing them moving some of their cargo and their manufacturing out of China.
Rachel, another one here for you. I'm combining a couple here, so bear with me. You touched on this a bit earlier. California's good movement sector is heavily regulated compared to other states. How does that impact retailers, and is that something that you focus on in your advocacy?
Yes, I focus a lot. We focus more now on regulatory than on legislative. I would say the regulatory environment in California is probably more complicated now than legislative. The regulatory environment is really where I probably get more interest from my members than when we go through the legislative process. And so it is a challenge. And I do think that is where we see the higher costs to businesses comes out of the regulatory bodies. And the problem is in California, the regulatory bodies don't communicate to each other either. And there's really no checks and balances. One of the things we've been really advocating for a lot with the legislature is that a lot of other states have sunset review of regulatory agencies. We don't do that in California. So a lot of times these regulatory boards continue to operate with zero oversight. They don't have to come back before the legislature. The legislature doesn't ask them to come back. Some states will zero out their budgets at the beginning of the year, and they have to justify why they still need to be in existence. We don't do that. A lot of this happened during COVID when a lot of the legislature gave a lot of their authority to the regulatory agencies. And so we're seeing regulatory bodies taking on issues that candidly are outside of their statutory authority. And so a lot of times we are playing whack-a-mole with these regulatory boards. And really that is what I would say more often than not is what is causing businesses to not invest more in California or unfortunately make decisions to leave the state. So the regulatory environment, I think, is something that we've been really advocating to the governor's office and to the legislature about, that we really need to get a handle on how out of control in some cases some of these regulatory boards can get.
Thanks, Rachel. Our next question is for Jean that comes from Bill Mongaluzzo of the Journal of Commerce. Bill asks, Jean, do you expect Southern California ports this year to retain some of that discretionary cargo that was captured from East and Gulf Coast ports in 2024 during their prolonged contract negotiations?
Thanks, Bill, and good to hear from you again. Well, that's certainly the intent, and we faced kind of a perfect storm over the last 18 months. A protracted labor negotiation on the East Coast, drought conditions in the Panama Canal, and security issues in the Red Sea that, according to most reports, showed that the Suez Canal crossings and receipts were down 80+%, driving more cargo to the West Coast. Now, realistically speaking, having this deal ratified by the ILA in the coming weeks will be good for the American economy. And I expect, although history has shown that some of that cargo is going to move back, we're going to keep chipping away for every pound of cargo we have. And it has meaning on so many levels. One, for every 4 containers we move here at the Port of Los Angeles, it creates a job. This is very impactful to our local, regional, and state economy. Secondly, that intact ocean box coming from Asia that some call discretionary moves through that Alameda corridor, the 22-mile below-grade rail line that removed 200 at-grade separations when it was first put into work almost 25 years ago. Think of the time when driving to school or going to work, we would stop at every rail crossing as the arms went down. 200 of those have been moved out. And the speed of these trains can also go at about 40 miles an hour, getting goods to market much faster than in any other urban market in the nation. That being said, we've underperformed because the cargo that we've lost due to market share deterioration has typically been that intact ocean box going on rail. So we've got to keep finding new ways to incent and bring confidence to the marketplace that the Southern California Gateway and the rail product is the best, bar none. And as we talk about shifting cargo to Southeast Asia, this is really an exciting time for us because as we can see reconfiguration of ocean services, that can play right into what we want to do to capture that market. But at the same time, for every retailer that is moving out of China to look for sourcing in other locations, the first conversation begins with the China cost plus the new tariff. That's the cost out of new country A. So it's not so much finding and chasing that cheaper price. It's trying to stay fluid with cargo that gets to the American consumer. All of this yields higher prices. And that's where we've got to keep doing our level best to keep this supply chain moving and not being additive to that increased cost structure. So I appreciate it, Bill. Thank you very much.
All right, Rachel, we're going to turn back to you, and I'm going to head to our Q&A box here. We have Alejandra Carranza from Supply Chain Dive. Alejandra, asking about tariffs here, asks, what are you advising retailers to mitigate tariff-related challenges?
A lot of our big retailers, national brands, they have some amazing subject matter experts, and they've been anticipating this. So like we mentioned before, a lot of them have been working to bring in product ahead of time to really with the consumer in mind. So they've been looking at and anticipating this, for months. I go back to worrying about our smaller retailers who really don't have the capacity to do that. They don't have big logistic departments that can really, make these decisions on the fly like the larger brands. They don't have the ability to get product in here as quickly as some of the national folks. So, we do the best that we can. We try to help them as much as we can. I will say the retail industry does try to work collaboratively on this, and some of the bigger brands do try to help some of the smaller retailers in different ways because we want to have a robust retail community, particularly here in California. But we're trying to do everything we can to help the small retailers. They're the ones that I think are going to feel the pinch the soonest if some of these tariffs do go into effect. They're the ones that are really, I worry about the most, your mom and pops, who really, to me, they're the lifeblood of our communities. They are the Main Street retailers. They are the ones that, we try to really promote consumers to remember to go to your small retailers in your communities because they're the ones that we really want to make sure. We did this through COVID a lot, and we're going to continue to do that if we see these tariffs come into reality. But a lot of our large brands have been anticipating these tariffs coming into play. I think, as Jean mentioned, they're able to pivot. We've kind of been through this before with other issues, but we're going to have to see how this plays out.
Jean, Alejandra has a follow-up question for you, just kind of shifting perspectives in that same vein. In terms of front-loading cargo, are you hearing or seeing any impact on warehousing space due to increased amounts of inventory?
Yeah, good question, Alejandra, and thank you. Unlike what we witnessed during COVID, the warehousing complex that we look at here in Southern California, more than 2 billion square feet under roof of warehousing, distribution, and fulfillment centers, along with cross-docks, are operating very smoothly. I recently spent some time with Lou Horn of CBRE and some of his colleagues talking about how we're going to bring this together a little bit in an upcoming symposium on supply chain with APL Logistics here in a couple of weeks. So I like the spot that we're in right now. The experts in this part of our business segment are very confident that we can handle the cargo coming through, even at these heightened levels. And again, Alejandra, it's been about 7 months of real peak season volumes continuously, and no backups, no bottlenecks. But we have to keep working hard at this every day, and nothing is taken for granted. Appreciate it.
One last part to Alejandra's question here, Jean, before we move on. She asks, on the front-loading part, what type of cargo is being front-loaded and from where?
All types of products that are coming through this port, and a lot from China. Again, we do some other business too that's been really interesting to watch. Back on the campaign trail, as I referenced, 10%, 25% on all goods from countries was what we all heard in our sector, and that's what folks began planning for. Even with Mexico's rise in the manufacturing sector, and they've stepped up to be the #1 trading partner of the United States after 20 years of China being in that pole position, it's automotive parts and finished vehicles, appliances, electronics, and others. We're doing a lot of business coming through the Port of Los Angeles to feed those maquiladora-era manufacturing facilities, whether it's Mexicali here in Baja California or Laredo, Nuevo Laredo crossing the border in Texas, and Ciudad Juarez crossing the Zaragoza Bridge in El Paso. That's an appreciative amount of business for us, fueling that rise in Mexico manufacturing. As we look to rebuild in the Pacific Palisades area of Los Angeles and Altadena in LA County, we're going to need soft lumber from Canada, appliances from Mexico, furnishings from China. And my concern right now is all these costs are rising because of those tariffs. We've got to have the skilled workforce out there to build these houses. And I know that's another area that Rachel is working on deeply here in the state of California. So there's a lot to consider here. And I'm talking about policy, not politics. But we've got some real good folks around this topic right now to make sure that we're keeping an eye on what's impactful and how we can be helpful.
Thanks for that, Gene. All right, we'll take one or two more questions here. First, we have kind of a general question from Eric Watkins, a freelancer. Eric asks, Gene, why is it important to track the import and export of empty containers? What's the significance? Are imported empties more significant than exported or vice versa? Or are they equally important?
Eric, as always, very intuitive question. On the import side, what we see are repositioned, refrigerated empty containers if they're not used at a discount by the shipping lines for dry goods. On the export side, because of our imbalance of container trade, here in Los Angeles, we're at about 4 imports to every 1 export. The balance 3 go back to Asia to quickly pre-position at factories for the next wave of imports coming back to us. We'd like to continue to use those empties. In fact, Bob Sinner of SB&B Foods in Castleton, North Dakota, and I were in Washington just in December to talk with the Agriculture Department on how better we can use those excess empties in key agriculture regions in the Midwest as well as here in California to keep moving cargo back to Asia and bettering those round-trip economics for the shipping lines. So there's still much more work to do. But at this month's report, with 327,000 empties going back to Asia to those factories, I see more cargo coming our way. Thanks, Eric.
All right, Gene, and our last question here comes from a couple of reporters, Donna Littlejohn of SoCal News Group and Laura Curtis from Bloomberg. Both are asking here about zero emissions projects here at the port. The port has received grants for zero emissions projects under the Biden administration. How much of that is secure? And are you anticipating that the port may have to fight to keep it? As a follow-up here, if this funding dries up moving forward, are there alternative sources, and how will it impact your push towards zero emissions in the coming years?
Donna, Laura, really appreciate you joining again this month, and you've been so dedicated to keeping up with the business here at the ports. What I would say is this. Over the last 3.5 years here at the Port of Los Angeles, we had our best run ever when it came to federal and state funding across the board. Nearly $1 billion was earned from those two great partners. And what we saw was a range of interests, from $110 million through California Governor Gavin Newsom and our California legislature to build the nation's first goods movement training campus, along with the Port of Long Beach, ILW, PMA, and the California Workforce Development Board, to projects that would help transform energy to renewable, as well as bring equipment first in production here so we could test it out in real time. There's still about $500 million of outstanding grant money that we've earned through the application process. And as I've said publicly, we will knock on every door necessary in Washington, develop business relationships, and share that the jobs economic growth and infrastructure to support those first two are key to our value proposition with federal and state partners. Now, of course, this is a multi-decade approach that we've taken here in Los Angeles and Long Beach, for that matter, on zero emissions. And we're not just going to say that it's going to impact because of a budget cycle or an economic cycle or even an election cycle. We've got to be able to invest through cycles consistently, and that's what we'll attempt to continue doing. At the same time, we'll lean on our state partnership. The alignment there is still very strong, from electeds to policymakers. And the area that I've been so impressed with is the investment from the private sector. Even with the most recent EPA grant at $412 million, it was backed up by an additional $260 million from terminal operators and our own investment here at the Port of Los Angeles. So we're going to continue to run as fast as we can, develop these relationships, and invest in the cleaner technology as long as it takes to get to our zero emission goals. Thank you both.
Thank you, Gene. That concludes our media questions for today. I'll turn it back over to you for final thoughts.
Rachel, I think what we know now, our friends in the media and viewers will see that you're another great partner of our supply chain and goods movement. And that's only a little bit of what you do every day, but
you.
so knowledgeable and so willing to work with all of us. I know you were at the Go Biz conference yesterday in Sacramento.
Yes.
You flew down last night to be here early this morning, and you're going right back on a 1 o'clock flight to join California Ports Day.
I am.
I consider it a personal friendship
Yes.
that you were able to come down here today and share a little bit about the hard work that the CRA does.
Well, thank you. Thanks for having me. This is such an important part, great partnership. You know, I love working with you. I love the work that you do. We got a lot accomplished during COVID. I love the training center. It's something that we are very passionate about as well, because we want to see that next generation. I think these are great jobs down here at the port. I always promote them when I talk to folks, because it really is, you know, as you know, our dear friend, it's a system of systems.
Yes,
and
Fran Inman.
Fran, yep, and we need to make sure everything is working, because again, at the end of the day, it really is about the consumers in California, and that's what I always think about, is making sure the consumers are taken care of. So thanks for having me.
Oh, really appreciate it. Travel safe, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you.
Finally, as I mentioned at today's start, last month's fires in LA remain at the forefront of our thoughts, especially in the wake of so much loss. That said, it's been inspiring to witness LA's incredible spirit of community, partnership, and resilience. There are countless stories to be told, and I'd like to highlight a few now involving the Port of Los Angeles and our partners. This situation hit close to home for our Los Angeles Port Police. A 21-year veteran of the Port Police, Officer David Cervantes, and his family tragically lost their home in Altadena. Officer Cervantes has received an outpouring of support from all of his port colleagues and the community. We all continue to stand by him and his family in their efforts to rebuild. Meanwhile, for nearly a month, more than 50 sworn police officers and civilian personnel serve daily supporting the Palisades fire response. Working alongside the Los Angeles Police Department, LA County Sheriff, the LA Fire Department, and other first responders, they committed to 12-hour shifts to assist with traffic control, perimeter containment, and to ensure unauthorized personnel were kept out of the fire zones. This was an incredible effort by a Los Angeles police force. And I'm so very proud of each and every one of these Port Police members for their sacrifice and dedication. Port personnel were also at the forefront of the city's Emergency Operations Center, which serves as the information hub for public safety during crisis situations. Lynette Ursery, the port's emergency management coordinator, was stationed at the EOC for nearly 3 weeks, lending her specialized expertise and support. While the EOC plays a critical role in managing immediate crises, there are many other ongoing challenges. For example, poor air quality near fire-damaged areas has been a significant concern. So, In response to Mayor Bass's request for assistance, our port's construction and maintenance team helped coordinate the delivery of nearly 1 million N95 masks to communities impacted by the fires. These high-grade masks were initially obtained as part of the port's logistics response to the COVID-19 pandemic. They're part of a reserve maintained for future health threats or wildfires, and that foresight proved invaluable in this situation. I want to express my appreciation to Tim Clark, Danny Hughes, Victor Sanson, Glenn Jackson, and the entire construction and maintenance team for spearheading this initiative. Because of their work, masks have been made available at senior and rec centers, along with public libraries from Altadena to the Palisades and across the LA region. In addition, the port facilitated the delivery of nearly 600 air purifiers to the Los Angeles Unified School District. These were donated by the Chicago Public Schools. When we learned that transportation was needed to get the units from Chicago to LA, it was our own Aveen Sharma who reached out to our logistics partners to make that happen. We're so grateful to C.H. Robinson for providing the trucks and DCLI for the chassis to deliver 90 pallets of purifiers and filters, ensuring that thousands of LA students can breathe easier. Our thanks also go out to the 156 port employees who have volunteered to be part of the City of LA's Disaster Service Worker Program. These women and men either have been or could be deployed to relief centers or other city-related emergency requests in lieu of their regular port duties. And finally, we also witnessed remarkable support from our shipping partners here at the port. Rodolphe Sade, Chair and CEO of CMA CGM in Marseille, France, contributed $1.5 million to the American Red Cross and the LA Fire Department Fund to assist with our recovery. Thank you so much, Rodolphe, for your incredible generosity. All these efforts by so many in the port community fill me with what I like to call Pola pride. We're all a part of a community that cares and comes together as family in both good times and bad. As I shared with our partners at the State of the Port, together we will unite to rebuild what has been lost. With confidence in our leaders and in ourselves, I have no doubt this city, county, region will emerge from this challenge not only stronger, but more united and resilient than ever. Thank you for joining us today. Take care, everyone, and we'll see you again in March.